So, have you ever heard things like, I don't believe in dyslexia? Or, I mean, what are some of the things you hear if you use that word with other people? Go.
I'm still studying, but I'm a regular ed teacher, and I heard from like our special ed guru that we're not allowed to say it because it's a medical diagnosis.
Okay,
And
that's a
I'm
big
confused
one.
about
Yeah.
that.
That's what, and I wanted to ask also in that same respect as a parent and as a teacher in my district, there's this disconnect with that, it's a medical diagnosis, but also because it's under the umbrella of learning disability or reading disability, we don't have to specifically classify it as dyslexia. They're receiving everything they need under the umbrella of a reading disability. And that's where I keep struggling with parents and all of us trying to understand, well, does that still cover it? Because it doesn't sound like it does today.
Reading disability is too general.
Yes.
You know, reading disability can mean a lot of different stuff. And the medical thing, I mean, you can diagnose it medically with an autopsy. I mean, you can look at the plenum temporal region and see the cellular structure, but it's not actually diagnosed medically. It's diagnosed through educational testing and
Why do you think they keep passing that around? Is it that parents are coming in with a diagnosis from another kind of organization or medically?
Well, I mean, what I find is that parents, they know their child has a problem. They're trying to figure out what it is. They're hearing that there isn't a problem in the classroom. They're making progress, so they don't have to worry about it. And so parents start researching, and somewhere along the line they read, I started reading about dyslexia, and they have every one of these things. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it's sort of normal to ask. The thing is that when you get the denial of it even being something that exists, I mean, I get a lot of, well, I don't believe in it. I don't know what to say about that. It's sort of like, I don't believe in that the earth is round, or it's not totally round, but, the only reason that I've ever been able to figure out for denying the terminology, I think the reason for using the term is that it puts you into a body of well-established research that gives you a map for how you need to proceed. And that's why I think it needs to be differentiated from just garden variety reading disabilities.
And is there a difference between the state and the federal level? Because I've gotten that response too, that federally with the letter to the colleagues and everything that we've heard today and I've heard in the past versus PA law, they've tried to distinguish that somehow PA is different than federally.
PA has to follow federal law.
Which I know that sounds ridiculous, but
yeah.
I mean, I had heard, because I spent a lot of time with the school districts asking them to use the term dyslexia. On the IEP, they have like 12 things that they can say, and the 12th one, which is specific learning disability, they can't make that diagnosis dyslexia because it's not in the law of PA. That's what they say.
Well, you can say specific learning disability of the dyslexic type.
Right, dyslexia in the law, dyslexia is listed under specific learning disabilities. It lists different things, including dyslexia. So it is actually in the law.
Yeah. I mean, I start fighting about the word dyslexia, and I start fighting about multisensory. I can't even remember what it is, but explicit, direct. Like I wanted those words in the IEP.
Yeah, they won't. I was going to say, like, in my 12 years as a special education teacher, I had never had one report until I got your report with a client that ever, when I knew the child had dyslexia, that ever would say that it was dyslexia.
Yeah.
And whenever I would confront the district that I was working with, basically it came to money. They didn't want to have to support the programs, or we didn't have the funding to
Or they didn't have anybody trained.
They didn't have anybody trained to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of like by denying the word, you cut down the communication. Well, we don't believe in that, or that's not something that we consider, then where does the discussion go? But to me, that's the whole reason for using the word, is that it plugs you into the body of knowledge. And there's more research on dyslexia than any other learning disability on the planet. And there's more well-researched specificity about what has to happen. And so if you agree to the terminology, you pretty much have to agree that the specially designed instruction should be research-based and should be designed to match what the person's needs are under that umbrella label. So I try to get it in there, although I'm usually unsuccessful, but I put it in my reports all the time.
But that's helpful. That's helpful at least to the parents, because then they know what they're fighting for and what they're dealing with and what they're looking for and asking for. And it's validating to the child as well to know, okay, what I have going on has a name, and it's just
And I'm
something.
not just dumb,
Right.
which is what kids always think. Kids just come to the conclusion very quickly that they must just be dumb. And so again, what I try to do is explain to children, this is what's going on and this is why you're having trouble with this. And the good thing is that there's a whole lot of people who have this problem. We know exactly how to fix it. We just have to get somebody working with you that can help you get somewhere. And that's a big leap to make. But one thing that I use as the comeback when we don't believe in it or something like that, saying, well, you're a public school. It's in your own regulations. It's been in the Pennsylvania standards since 1990. So you can't use that federal thing. Okay, so you know about the dyslexia pilot program in PA? You know about that?
Yes.
Rachel was talking at lunchtime, Rachel Kirby, about the initiatives in Pennsylvania. The thing is, it doesn't seem to be trickling down into schools all that well. I think basically what they did is they set up a pilot program, but it's not really pilot anymore. I mean, it's been going on for a while now.
You want me to tell you about it?
Yeah,
I'm
good.
Daphne, who helped get
Good.
it passed. So, it was supposed to be 3 districts is what passed legislatively. The department added 5 more, so there were 8.
Yeah.
And they did that because in the legislation, we wanted districts 3 to 15,000 for research purposes. And actually, we didn't want Philadelphia and Pittsburgh because they're really big and hard to deal with.
Yeah.
But a majority of Pennsylvania school districts are under 3,000. So they wanted to add smaller districts and other big districts. But anyway, the 3 years is done. It is really it's really a literacy pilot. It's not dyslexia. And as I just said in my previous thing, we had a whole conversation about with the department, whether the word dyslexia should even be used in the legislation. But since we were all dyslexic parents that were fighting for the legislation, we said use the word. We want the word used because we want people to start saying the word. That has hurt us on some occasions with some districts. So that first 3 years is done. We passed the extension for 2 more years. Of the 8, there's only 5 left in it. This is a research project as well, so it's very constraining to school districts. They have to keep a lot of data. Rules about how many are in the small group. They were only supposed to be 3. And then kids who come in the middle of the school district or the school year were not supposed to be added into the group. But of course, if they know these school districts and teachers are great, right? They want to help everybody, and so they'd add them in, So, and then the department has expanded it now. They've added 15 school districts. They got 40 plus school districts who applied for these 15 slots. They have managed to find a way to help almost all of them in some way, shape, or form with this pilot, trying to get them training, get them a little more money. So it is very slow. It's a slow process.
How does it hurt?
Hmm?
You said using the terminology has hurt rather than helped.
So sometimes in the beginning, they were having parent meetings in some of the districts out west, and the parents were like, my kids aren't dyslexic, why are you putting them in there? Well, they're not dyslexic. So they were afraid of being labeled. So we had to go back and explain, this is a reading, this is everybody. They want to, find out how everybody is doing and to help all kids. So they didn't want to be labeled, some of them. And I think because we also use the word OG, and we all know that's the basis for some really good quality stuff. But there's a lot of things, a lot of rumors in the world out there, they say, well, OG equals dyslexia. Not understanding, right, that OG helps all kids to read better, even the kids who excel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the kids who are gonna read well no matter what, it helps them as well. But parents are like, that's not gonna help my kids, doesn't need it. So it's just craziness like this, right? It's
Yeah.
just,
I find the whole label discussion archaic, to be really frank with you. In 1999, when we started doing this, and I wound up going down to Tennessee at that point, having been a teacher, I was certainly expecting a lot of the same that I experienced here in Pennsylvania. In Tennessee, when we went into the school at the primary level, K through 3, all of their Title I dollars were there. They essentially had a third of all of the teachers at that primary level trained in Linda Nudbow. There was no label necessary. You never knew why you went to Miss Diane instead of Miss Margaret,
Right.
but you got helped and no kid felt anything at all different. The other thing that they did do, they were using a kinesiology program as part of what they were offering at that particular point. Every student had PE 5 days a week. The children with learning differences that could be helped by kinesiology and academics being offered simultaneously, their PE was done there with the Bridges coordinators, and the other kids just went to general PE. I mean, so there are lots of ways that this can be done. And 1999 was an awfully long time ago. Pennsylvania can learn from somebody else. They don't have to invent all of this, but labels are not helpful.
Well, and that's why when we were talking the other session about the advantage of private school. The private school, you don't have to use labels because you're just dealing with people to get it. And so, everything's done anyway. So that's why you pick the private school, so you're just working with people who get it. They don't have to use the label stuff. Where the label stuff comes into play is when you're dealing with the bureaucracy that requires the label to do anything. And that's where
The label does, I believe, lead to some accountability. I think my observation, but of course it's been a little while since I've been doing this, they avoided the label because they avoided the accountability then, which meant that the student was not getting what the student needed. And when you look at the outcomes for communities, both short-term and long-term, it would be far better if we used our dollars wisely at the educational level than to basically put them into remediative programs and prisons, because that's where they're going when we don't teach kids to read effectively. It's just short-sighted.
It's a catch-22 because there's so many kids that could benefit from Orton-Gillingham-based teaching strategies,
Absolutely.
not just dyslexics.
Absolutely.
But until we start using the label and raising awareness about how many kids are affected and what the right strategies are for these kids, then we're not going to be implementing the program. So it's...
Well, the other problem with the label is that when you ask a lot of people if they know what dyslexia is, they'll tell you it means you read everything backwards.
The other thing is,
So the other part is you gotta teach what it is we're talking about when we use that terminology, because it narrows you into what it is you're looking at and what it is that you need to do to address it.
but it can be done also by fiat or legislative mandate. It essentially, the reason Tennessee looked that way was because in 1999, they passed a law. Every child with dyslexia was entitled to a mainstream education.
Yeah.
And therefore, you just simply had to do it. It wasn't optional.
Do you know if they're still doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
so Pennsylvania is a local control state, it's much bigger, and the union is strong. And so I would say to you, yeah, it'd be great, but I don't know that it'd be that easy. And school districts have a real, they want to control what they do. And so I have a conversation with my one friend all the time about superintendents start something really good, the next one comes in and they go back to the old stuff. And this has happened in a couple of the pilot sites that are no longer in the pilot clearly. And so how do you change that? And she said to me, it has to become best practices. And so that also starts at the department, at the top with the department. I mean, I think the Department of Ed definitely sees the value of this. I think they're going to change the name of it, get rid of maybe dyslexia and probably name it something else and then do a bigger push, which I'm like all for, right? Then we're going to deal with the dyslexic kids, right? Because they're still, while this helps everybody and it's going to help those kids on the mild end, we still have to help those dyslexic kids.
I think we sell ourselves short. You're absolutely right. There are political motivations in many cases, but if you look at the broad population as a whole, if we all just decided to get together and say, reading is a good thing, teaching children to read effectively is a very good thing, and it's a better use of my tax dollars than what's happening right now, There are more of us than there are of teachers' unions or teachers. I mean, if we all, and I'm not saying anything, I'm a teacher myself, so I'm not. But the reality is, I think, as a common core of people, we need to look at the fact that our dollars are not being spent wisely. There are better ways to do this, and I happened to be in a discussion with the assistant superintendent of special education after she was named, and it was very interesting because I was asking, they were talking about the results of the pilot, and I stopped short because we were beamed across this whole state and it just wasn't the right forum. But I looked and I said, when are we in Pennsylvania going to address the needs of all dyslexic students, no matter where they are, instead of being in a special cohort of some kind? And she basically looked back and said, well, we only got 2 years more funding. And that was her answer. My answer would have been, if I hadn't been beamed across the state, you are given literacy funding for every single student in every single seat. You're choosing methodology that isn't working. And you have the data to show that's not working. You also have data to show something else is working.
School districts are choosing it.
Mm-hmm.
So even with the pilot, we were not allowed to go in and say, initially, you have to use this program. We said these are the elements. So if you read through that legislation, it's very specific about what the elements of that curriculum or program needed to be. But you can't go in and tell a school district this is what we're going to do because they're local control. And again, we have to get to the point where they all understand it and that they understand exactly what you said. And we've said this a million times in the pilot. The goal was to show if you teach reading this way to everybody from kindergarten, those assignments to special ed are going to drop because hopefully you've captured a lot of them.
Yep.
I'm not 100% sure that we've proved that yet. We're getting there. I think I just was speaking to the principal of the Penn Argyl School District, one of those elementary schools in Penn Argyl, and she sees it. She sees it in her results. She's one school, right? And we have to slice and dice those numbers more and talk about that. In the end, you're going to save money. And that, to me, is where we get everybody else.
I think one of the saddest things for me was I heard the governor, after he signed the legislation that basically raised the age for children to be able to drop out of school, for students to drop out. And you know what his reasoning is? You have to stay those extra 2 years because learning to read and write is so important. Mm-hmm. So you're going to keep them with a methodology that fails them. They're not learning anything more, but you've locked them into a failing system. And then you wind up with students who have emotional issues, who have isolation issues, who become depressed, who are suicidal, who go to prison. And then when you look at even that, I mean, the bottom line is because we have a cash bail system, if you cannot read in our economy, it's very difficult to get a paying wage job. And so what happens is they'll get maybe 4 or 5 misdemeanors, like a lot of parking tickets will do it to you. And they wind up then going to prison because they can't afford the $500 cash bail or the $1,000 cash bail. They'll sit 9 months to a year in prison not having been adjudicated. There's something really broken here. I'm sorry, and that's the last I'll say.
No, you're right. There is something really broken. But
Can we go after it a different way, though? So what about the people who make the defective instruction? So the Wonders program or any of the
people who make
like the manufacturers of the curriculum, the publishers of the curriculum. Because it seems to me, I'm just like thinking, to fix this, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of grassroots effort, and we should do that.
It
But is
has
there
to come
another
down to
way?
teacher training, and it has to come down to a system that supports teachers implementing the methodology.
But if we had a car that was defective for 20% of the people that use it.
Well, I'll tell you what happened in Pennsylvania is, back when they passed No Child Left Behind, there were big government grants, federal grants that were issued. In Pennsylvania, they were issued, but they went to McGraw-Hill. And McGraw-Hill was the developer of the SRA Reading Mastery Series.
Right.
Which is kind of like a cookbook approach. It's basically a scripted method for teachers that don't know how to teach this way, okay? So Pennsylvania bought into it lock, stock, and barrel. And instead of training teachers to actually teach explicit phonics, they trained teachers to use the McGraw-Hill series. And so, again, the cookbook approach doesn't work to this. You really have to have people that understand how to do explicit teaching and synthetic phonetic approaches and really get it. But you have to have a strong educational background. And when we have colleges that don't teach reading specialists about this, okay, I mean, it's not taught at the college level. It's not supported when teachers get out into their jobs. It's not being provided as in-service training. It's not being provided as training within school districts, and so it perpetuates this cycle of, well, right now the big thing is everything is average. So as long as you're just getting by, or you could show like you know how to spell one word that you didn't know how to spell last year, that's progress, so we don't have to do anything. And it's a horrible problem, because even things, it used to be that students who were illiterate, they went to the VOTEC school or what have you. Well, now, you can't get through an auto body textbook without having a college reading level. And the literacy requirements of any type of IT program or anything like that that's computer-based, they're really high. And so it's a core problem that just morphs into all these other problems at a societal level. But yeah, they did the study with the prisons and stuff way back in the 70s, and they found that the biggest single predictor of people that end up incarcerated is illiteracy.
Absolutely.
Hasn't changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, I feel like the defect is teacher training, right?
Yeah.
I went through an alternative teaching program when I first started out, and my first year teaching was with other teachers who went through traditional university, and I luckily had just some expert in my alternative teaching program just randomly, and I was taught all of this. I was trained in Wilson, and the other teachers coming out of university who'd spend 4 years were like, wait, how do you know how to teach someone how to read?
Yeah.
So how, I guess like what you were saying, what's the problem? How do we get the universities to teach the teachers, the school districts to use best practices so that kids don't have to rely, most parents can't afford private school.
That was the same way I got my training. I got a master's degree, and I just happened to go to a program that taught all the literacy skill diagnostics and all the dyslexia components. And I was up in Canada to get my master's. When I came back, I found out I was like the only one around that knew anything about it. But it has to be part of teacher training. But if a teacher goes and gets trained on their own and goes back into a district that doesn't support the if the teacher's mission is to deliver the curriculum, period, then that teacher can't really practice or use those skills.
What's the alternative?
So, I went to school for child development, and I then was like, oh, I should be a teacher. I can't get a job with this degree. And I did Teach for America, which I wouldn't necessarily be super supportive of, but it got me in with a lot of professionals who donated their time to teach us in our summer training. And then I went to grad school where I had some professors who I got specific teacher training. And so there's I taught mostly in DC, and there's a lot of programs in cities like that that'll get you to be a teacher through alternative means if you don't have an undergrad degree in it.
Well, I graduated so long ago that we were taught Orton Gillingham methodology and phonics, and that was what everybody got.
It's been around forever.
Well, it was interesting because I had my first discussions on this with the state with Ann Hickson Herman, and she basically told me, well, the issue was that Clarion was the only state school at the point that she was talking to me that was doing half decently with this kind of methodology for teachers. And I had to just look at her and say, the reality is, it's not like you have to invent this, dust it. I know it's on the shelves there because that's how I was trained. But, the answers that I keep hearing are money and inability to get the cohorts through the teacher training programs. Honestly, if we just keep saying that but we don't do anything about it, that problem will still be here 10 years from now.
Well, it's been here forever, but what I find is that it's really district-wide. There are some districts that I won't say the district, but anyway, if I do, you have to figure we'd move there. But I had a meeting with a parent and the head of special education for the district, and it was a 5th, 6th grade student who was first grade reading level, what have you. And I said, I don't see any other alternative except to send this kid to a school where they know what they're doing. So I was suggesting like AIM Academy and Conshohocken and stuff. And the district special ed supervisor said, I'm willing to do that and pay for the transportation, but I want to check one other thing first. So she got back to me and she said, I made a deal with AIM Academy. I'm going to send 5 teachers down, get them started in Wilson training and everything, and I'm going to have them supervise our program because we don't know what we're doing, and we have all these kids that are in this boat. Now, I'm sure as soon as that person moves on to another district, the whole thing's going to go out the window with her. But, you know.
What I found very interesting was when I was going through this, I was teaching at the same time I was working to get a free and appropriate public education for our individual. And the thing that boggled my mind was, as a teacher and as a taxpayer, I knew how many kids were going through my classrooms with the same kind of issues. And we were this close to due process, and I finally looked at the attorney and said, exactly what am I going to win here? And she said, well, of course you're going to win that he will go to Janice School and your district will pay for it. And I said, well, wait up. He doesn't belong there. I already did the summer program there. That's like hitting a fly with a howitzer.
Yeah.
What? And then I just looked and I said, why is this working like this? I do not understand. And what she said is because for every one of you who is willing to go to this length to get a free and appropriate public education, 500 other kids are just going to get failed. They're just going to go through and they're just going to not be okay. But there's a problem. If we've known for this long that that's how we're working, why does it keep working this way, and what do we need to do to change it?
But I think
I ask myself that question every day.
there's no pain and suffering when you go through due process. You get settlement dollars that are like fuzzy dollars that are in trusts. If you only can use it, it's in trust for the district's money. And they still keep the money, they get the investment earnings off of it. I think if we opened up pain and suffering in the due process, that would incite the school districts to do something different, which then you have to follow the money. We always say it's funding.
You got to follow the decisions. I mean, a lot of times you go through due process and all you get is a year's worth of, something different. And then you're right back at it again.
But how many don't go through due process? How many are filed and settled
Well, a
before
lot
they
of
go
times
through
it
due
doesn't make
process?
any sense to go through due process, to tell you the truth, because sometimes you go the whole way through due process and the gains are so small. It might be you get a settlement, so you get a bank account that'll pay for some tutoring dollars.
Correct.
Or you get, the district's ordered to provide a Norton Gillingham program, and so you get it for like 1 year with some teacher, and then they forget.
If I'm the administrator and I'm going to do what you just said, I'm going to say that only 1% of my students are going to go for due process and are going to potentially fight. So I'll put away money in my budget to handle that instead of putting money into the curriculum. Like, it's the money, it's the budgeting. I'm in finance. But
I guess the issue for me then was the outcome. I needed to have a proper outcome, and I'm proud to say that I sit on the board of governors of the Children's Dyslexia Center because those people saved our child's future. Because they selling soup and pies and washing cars and working hard, they paid for tutoring. They never asked for anything from me. I didn't have to have means testing, and they did 3 years of Norton Gillingham training. And to this day, Jonathan will tell you, not a day goes by he does not use something. And this happened to be his tutor who's sitting here, Mr. Hall. There's not a day that goes by I don't use something Mr. Michael taught me. Not a day that goes by. And that's how crucial this is for kids who have this kind of a learning need. And we can provide it. If they can provide it, we can provide it.
Yeah.
How do we make that happen?
Good question. I mean, you've got 50 states that are all doing their thing under the federal government that have different interpretations of the federal laws. And the federal laws, even though they have more specificity in them, there's all kinds of workarounds and waivers and everything like that. And so I think it's a big systemic issue that just keeps perpetuating itself. I mean, I just finally said, I'm just going to fight this one kid at a time because it's too big to take on. I don't really know the answer. I mean, it's dumb. because it's a terrible allocation of money and dollars, and what we produce is a whole crop of people that sit and play video games and don't have a future because they don't have basic skills to be able to succeed in the classroom.
And the saddest part about that is in order to have that diagnosis, you have to be average to above average intelligence. And a mind is a terrible thing to waste. It just is.
Yeah. There are supposedly a lot of states with dyslexia statutes. But what I see, I have an office down in Delaware. I get a lot of kids in Delaware. They're where Pennsylvania was 25 years ago. I mean, I think it's bad here until
So we're not the worst here.
No.
I know, but but some districts become like very administratively top heavy. I mean, they're really good at fighting you back. If you're and quite honestly, the deck is stacked because when you take on a public school district, they have the taxpayer money and everything else, and you're out of your pocket. So
You're paying to fight against yourself.
Exactly.
I realize that midway through it all.
Yeah.
And a lot of the states, while they've passed legislation, there's no money behind it, so it sits there
Yeah.
and nothing happens with it. We were lucky here in Pennsylvania that they found the money, the Department of Ed believed in what the project was, and continues to do that. It's unfortunate.
Ignorance here, but why are they fighting against dyslexia in the first place?
Well, I think one thing is that if you identify people and you buy into this is what they need in order to become literate, then the school district has to provide teachers that are trained and that can teach and that have enough time in their schedules to work with you. So you figure if this is a 20% incidence problem, this is a whole lot of people that require this type of instruction. And you've got a system of people that aren't trained or that won't even recognize what the word means or don't know what the word means. So, we're starting with a profound amount of ignorance about this, and what happens is nothing happens. And then people end up spinning their wheels where you think if the school understood what was going on, they would do the right thing. Not frequently the case. They can understand what's going on and still refuse to provide services or say we don't teach that way or we don't have that or whatever. Or they'll say we think they're making progress and so we don't have to do anything different.
And do you have a specific site or place that you direct parents in dealing with that with the school district where it's the accurate information? When we're hearing things that are not, it doesn't sound truthful, the medical diagnosis, all these kinds of things, or that's just the federal way that it's done but not the state way that it's done. Is there something that we can reference or look at or get better and a better
documentation that
understanding?
comes right out of the state. You know how Angela was saying at lunchtime about with Patan?
Mhm.
Use the documentation that comes out of there. Okay.
Use the law. I mean, it's in the law.
It's in the law. It's in the regulations. It's in Chapter 14 in Pennsylvania. It's in.
But Wright's Law
Yeah.
is a good resource. We also on our website have links to a lot of different resources, and some of them are like that. And actually, I just wrote down ones I want to.
I find that sometimes certain ones that I'm pulling, they just shake their head like we don't, like you said, we don't acknowledge that site or that reference or that. So I'm wondering, is there something that they can't deny?
The law. The law.
Who might be able to help you if you contact the state Right to Education Task Force. Keith Vogt heads that up, and he basically can tell you what regulatory needs to happen.
Okay.
And he will also tell you if it's just a stylistic difference. And I think a lot of times that's what happens. They're saying, well, we're doing this, and that meets the letter of the law.
And that's what I'm
maybe not
getting
spirit
most of the
law.
time. We're doing this that meets this requirement.
But he would be able to tell you, and if you're a parent, the information to contact the state task force is towards the end of your procedural safeguards notice.
Okay, thank you.
But are you telling parents or?
I kind of represent everything. I'm a teacher for the district. I have children in the district with special needs, and I chair the, I don't want to say the district, but the Parents of Exceptional Children. So I'm constantly trying to represent the
Yeah.
parents that are trying to understand the law and fight for their rights in the law, but also keep my job at the same time. This is a little tricky.
I went to the Yale Institute for Dyslexia for a parent just getting to understand what it is.
Okay.
And then I like Wright's Law for the special education.
All right, that's great. Can I ask one more question? Okay, like in your talk this morning, you referenced this quote from 1987. When did dyslexia become a thing, identified?
Actually, the term was first used in 1905. But that was when they thought it was a vision problem.
So at what point did they, because I graduated high school in 87.
Yeah.
And I had all kinds of troubles educationally. Fourth grade, my parents were talking constantly with the school, there's something up with her. Yeah, well, they were all through school, but they tried to get me into a program or something. There was just, I won't go into all the details, but they ultimately said, well, she's just not trying hard enough, let's hold her back a year.
Yeah.
Well, nothing got fixed. And, I graduated high school and bombed the SAT, so, so college wasn't a thing. So it's been, quite a struggle to find employment and stuff, although I found employment, but it would have been easier with a degree.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit annoyed when I hear that word's been around a while. And
It's been in the Pennsylvania statute since 1990.
Okay.
And I
words-
got OG tutoring, mid-80s, like 86.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, I was, but
Yeah, but there's like the benchmark school, I mean, they've been around since the 50s and stuff. I mean, there have been schools and training programs for dyslexic people that go way back.
well, I mean, I don't know if the word ever came up, it certainly never crossed my path, while I was,
Yeah.
in K to 12.
So, I'm a different kind of doctor. I'm Rachel. And I guess you could call me a retired family physician. Let's just lighten things up a little bit. So, Lauren and I, we have a local tutoring firm, and we work with dyslexic students here in Lancaster, and we're in Gillingham Tree. And we do presentations at libraries, and parents ask us this question all the time at the libraries. They constantly say to us, like, we hear this, people tell us dyslexia doesn't exist. And we went to the school and we said our kid has dyslexia, and they said, we don't do that, or you have to go to a doctor for that diagnosis and whatever. And a lot of this has already been covered, so I'm just going to be really, really quick. There's only 3 slides in this, so don't get excited. Okay, yeah, so first of all, there's this idea, I kind of conceive this word as like meaning three different main things to 3 different constituencies of people. And this is kind of the first thing, dyslexia as a diagnosis, which is really how it started, right? If you go all the way back to 1905, the guy who came up with this, he was an ophthalmologist, he was one of my kind, okay? So he was, that's when like doctors were looking at dyslexia and going, I wonder what could be wrong with these people's brains. And then they were looking at the people with dyslexia and comparing them to people with strokes and going, well, maybe there's something wrong with their eyes, or maybe there's something wrong with their ears, or maybe there's something wrong in there somehow. We just have to figure out what that something is, and they called it word blindness. And you've all heard those stories and did crazy experiments on them, and they got lots and lots of things wrong. That's dyslexia as a diagnosis. Eventually, that diagnosis started to shift, and over the next century, now you don't see any physicians diagnosing dyslexia. It pretty much moved into the educational and the psychological realm, and so that's why people like Dr. Kay now diagnose dyslexia, and people like me pretty much never do. The exception might be like if you had a developmental behavioral pediatrician, which is a relatively new specialty. Those people are really interested in learning differences, and they specialize in autism and ADHD and other neurodevelopmental differences. So those physicians might be interested in helping facilitate diagnosis, but they're still going to work with an educational psychologist or a neuropsychologist to get your testing done. They're not going to do IQ testing in their office. They're not going to do your RAND-RAS in their office. That's not the kind of stuff that they're qualified to do. So if you think that you're going to go to a physician's office to get a diagnosis of dyslexia, or if somebody tells you that you should go see your doctor to get a diagnosis of dyslexia, that's sort of a really dumb idea. Some physicians may know something, but that's probably just because they're specifically interested. A lot of doctors will have no idea. I went to med school in the 90s. I promise you, it did not come up one time. One time in 4 years, never, never, never. And then I did 3 years of residency in family medicine, not one time, never. Never, ever brought up. So if someone had come in and said, I think my kid's dyslexic, I would have been like, oh, really? I would have tried to be helpful, but I would have had absolutely no idea what to do with that person.
I was talking with my friend who's a special ed teacher, and we were tossing it around for quite a while one night when we went out for a girls' night. We're like, why are they saying that? And we finally think it's because if they say it's a medical diagnosis, they do not have to pay for you to go to the doctor. They don't pay for you to go get your physical. They don't pay for you to go get stitches. That's on you. But if they say they think it's dyslexia, but we don't diagnose that, then they have to pay for her.
My dyslexic kid drew that picture in case you were. I said, if dyslexia was a disease, what would it look like? And she said, I think it would look like this. But don't worry, none of us think that dyslexia is a disease. This is not how I look at it. That's not how she looks at it either.
Did you say there was a point though, like the first diagnosis was like a medical doctor, and then since then has it all been educational, like psychologists?
Not since then. There was a sort of, at that point in medicine, psychiatry and psychology were almost the same thing. There wasn't really that much of a difference, and neurology
In 1905, they thought it was a vision problem.
Yeah, so they were like, they were like.
They thought it was medical,
Yeah.
but that's how far back the medical thing
But
goes.
any child who is labeled as dyslexic, it would come from a psychiatrist or a psychologist or
A
Psychologist.
psychologist. It's now
Because
all
not
psychologists.
Psychiatrists
not
are,
yet.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're really
it's all
diagnosing.
psychologists.
When we started out back in 1999, our family practitioner authorized 3 months' worth of diagnostic screening to be done at the Lancaster Club Palace Clinic. And that was covered by our insurance. Our first educational psychological evaluation was covered by our health insurance. And so I have a sense it would be much more difficult to take that path today,
Well,
that
if
was
it's
done with
educational,
physicians
they
at that point.
Yeah.
So that wasn't all that long ago.
Yeah, well, before me. Anything before me, I don't know about. Okay. This is the second thing, I think, the second way that I think I sense people using the word dyslexia. And I think that's how a lot of us are using this word here today. When my daughter found out she was dyslexic, it was like this huge sense of relief. Like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. So I'm not stupid. I know what's wrong. I know how to fix it. I mean, she saw Dr. Kay, happiest day of her life. That's how she remembered it. The happiest day of her life. She could not wait to go. She was so happy. She was worried she wouldn't be dyslexic. That's how she felt. She was so worried that she was dumb. She was so happy to be dyslexic. So, and when my husband found out, sort of secondarily as a consequence, it like changed his whole world, like his whole world view. And I think this idea of dyslexia as an explanation, as an identity, as a it's just an easy way to explain things. Like, when Kat's at school and somebody says, haha, you're reading that too slow, or you misspelled a word, she can go, shut up, you idiot, I'm dyslexic, not stupid. And it's like, explain, it would be a lot less of a sick burn to say, shut up, you idiot, I'm a kid with a specific learning disability in the areas of reading and writing. It just doesn't work, right? It just doesn't flow. There's something about having a single word term that explains exactly what's going on, and it connects you to all those other people. As Dr. Kay points out, it connects you to this long historical tradition, this body of literature, all these things that have been written, and it connects you to the advocacy organizations that exist for you. And also it's very emotional, and I think one of the reasons why it's so upsetting and why people get really heated about this word dyslexia is because of that strong emotional connection, that sort of campfire feeling that we have about this word dyslexia. Like, we're all here gathered around that word right now, and we feel strongly about it for our kids and for our families, and people who are dyslexic feel strongly about it as an identity. And then to like walk into a school and have somebody tell you that doesn't exist, you know, or we don't believe in that or whatever, is very unsettling.
Think of it as like climate change.
Yeah, it is.
So you get people that deny climate change, and then you've got people that sort of
It's angering, and I think some of those people probably think, what is the big deal about? I feel like I'm saying exactly the same thing, just using some different words. I'm just using some different terminology. I'm using the terminology for the DSM-5. It's not the DSM-5R yet, is it? Still DSM-5?
Yeah, it's still flying.
All right. Or I'm just using the language from IDEA, and that's why, you know, I'm using the language from the school form or whatever, or all the things that they tell you. And they don't, I don't think they realize what a wound that kind of creates when you're carrying around the word dyslexic as an identity.
Well, I think people, what I see is a great deal of relief with the diagnosis. Yes. Usually, because usually what the child thinks is, I must just not be smart.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so when they realize that you can be smart, in fact, you pretty much have to be smart to have this diagnosis, it sort of frees you up, because you realize that you've got a circumscribed kind of problem that people get. And there's a body of knowledge that tells you what to do. So it no longer becomes, I'm not a smart person, or I'm just not able to do anything.
Exactly.
And I think that's what happens is most humans go into like, they think when they're having trouble with something and they see all their friends doing this easily and they're not doing it easily, they just come to the conclusion, I must be dumb, even though their parents tell them they're not.
Here's the last way I think people use this word, and this is the way that I like to use the word dyslexia.
That says human trait,
oh,
but
yeah,
like,
sorry,
you can't read that.
You can't read that.
Like color.
I like the idea of dyslexia as a human trait, and this is really, you know, like, it's been a century since we started using the term, and we've learned a lot in genetics, neurology, psychology, and, you know, evolutionary psychology. We've just learned a lot about human brains, and yeah, we have a huge, long way to go, but we know a lot more than we did a century ago. So, I think we need to look at dyslexia the way we look at handedness. You know, and we used to think that people who are left-handed, who consist of about 10% of the population, we used to think that there was something wrong with them too.
Not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
Because
They were
my
considered-
father-in-law, who was very young, was taught to use his right hand in Catholic school.
Yeah,
So,
we actually called them sinister. And kids with who were left-handed were forced to write with their right hand because you need to get along in the world and you need to be a certain way because you need to be like the majority, because what the heck is wrong with you? And I've often said in our library presentations that when I sent my daughter to school, I felt like I was constantly sending a left-handed kid to a right-handed school, you know? And all the kids were cutting out circles, and they were all doing really well, and my kid was trying so hard to cut out the circles, and they just weren't turning out right. And I would point it out to the teachers, and they would just say to me, well, you know, they're not that bad. I mean, they look a little like squares, but they're not terrible. And I would say, yeah, but I just have this feeling like my kid can cut circles better than that. And they'd say, well, you know, some kids aren't very good at cutting circles. And I'd say, but I just feel like if she had the right pair of scissors, like if she could just have the right pair of scissors, you know? And they'd say, well, we do have a pair of left-handed scissors, but we'll keep it in safe. And they're a little bit rusty, and we can only get them out on special occasions, and we keep them for this one kid, because you should see him, like, he can only cut lines. It's really awful. And so, like, he needs the scissors way more than your kids. So she's just gonna have to make do with the freaking right-handed scissors. And, you know, then one day I got my kid a pair of left-handed scissors, and suddenly she was, you know, making snowflakes. And and then my husband, who's, you know, dyslexic and very good at analogies, reminded me that this is not really a good analogy. He said, you know, you've got it wrong, you see, because we don't need special left-handed scissors. What you have actually is these great scissors that are perfect for everybody. You have the best scissors in the whole world, and you just need to give them to all the kids. And I was like, okay, all right. So here are the best scissors in the whole world. That's what we need to give to everybody. That's all I have to say. All right, so.
We also have a series of blogs on
Oh, yes.
the D word. The first one's up, the other two will be coming very soon.
Yeah, we wrote some of that down in the blog, so.
If any of you are familiar with, Franklin Marshall has a program called Common Hour that's done on Thursdays, 11:30 to 12:30. It's open to the public. They'll actually even give you lunch. And I can't remember the date, but if you go on Franklin and Marshall's website and look up Common Hour, they have an upcoming speaker who's a very successful young man who's a severe dyslexic, and he's talking on changing the system so that neurodiversity is celebrated.
A lot of corporations are.
Franklin Marshall, one of their Common Hour speakers, it'll be early in March, but I can't remember the exact date, but if you just go Franklin Marshall Common Hour 2020, the whole list will come up.
Okay.
And there's a young man who is severe dyslexic, very successful businessman, who's coming in to talk about the fact that we need to really celebrate neurodiversity, not label it and isolate it.
I would say to dyslexic people, if you can make it through school with dyslexia, you can make it through anything life has to throw at you. I think that's true.